Commander Ethan Vale stepped off the shuttle, his boots making a firm sound against the polished black stone of the landing bay. The air was thick with the scent of something strange, like burnt metal mixed with honey. He had read about the Thalaxi homeworld before, but nothing could prepare him for the sight of it in person. The palace of Queen Frixa loomed ahead, its towering spires twisting into the dark sky like the claws of a great beast. The structure shimmered under the artificial lights, pulsing with deep blue energy veins that ran across its surface. It was unlike anything found in human space. Ethan adjusted his uniform, the insignia of the United Earth Defense Corps gleaming under the pale white lights of the hangar. His job was simple: protect the diplomats, make sure the peace talks went smoothly, and leave without causing trouble. The Thalaxi were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, and humanity needed their alliance. As he walked forward, a line of Thalaxi guards stood at attention. They were tall, insect-like beings covered in sleek black exoskeletons, their four glowing red eyes watching him closely. Some held long ceremonial spears, while others had energy weapons holstered at their sides. They did not speak, but their mandibles twitched slightly as he passed. A human diplomat, Ambassador Claire Henshaw, walked beside him. She was an experienced negotiator, her short gray hair neatly combed, her face calm. "Stay formal, stay respectful," she murmured. "And whatever you do, don't reach for your weapon, even if it's just to adjust it." Ethan nodded. "Got it." Together, they stepped into the palace's grand hall. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, supported by thick, curved pillars that seemed to shift slightly as if they were alive. Strange glowing symbols hovered in the air, their meanings unknown to Ethan. At the center of the hall, seated on a raised platform, was Queen Frixa. She was larger than the other Thalaxi, her exoskeleton a deep shade of violet, shimmering like polished stone. Her four glowing red eyes studied the newcomers, unblinking. A golden crest ran along the back of her head, showing her royal status. Draped across her shoulders was a flowing silver robe, woven with thin strands of energy. The room fell silent as Ethan entered. Then something strange happened. Queen Frixa froze. Her mandibles, which had been clicking softly as she observed the other diplomats, stopped moving. Her eyes widened, an expression that was rare for the Thalaxi. The fingers of her lower arms twitched, as if she were seeing something impossible. Ethan, confused, glanced around. The tension in the room was thick. Even the Thalaxi guards seemed unsure of what was happening. The queen slowly rose from her throne. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Catherine." The word echoed through the chamber, spoken in the deep, layered voice of the Thalaxi language. The other Thalaxi gasped, their antennae flicking in alarm. Ethan blinked. What?" Queen Frixa took a step forward, her lower hands trembling. "Catherine," she said again. This time, there was something in her voice, something like grief, like disbelief. Ethan looked at Ambassador Henshaw, hoping for some kind of explanation, but she looked just as lost as he felt. One of the Thalaxi nobles spoke in a sharp, hurried voice. "This cannot be. He is a human." Another replied, "But he looks exactly like." The whispers grew louder. The alien guards shifted uneasily, gripping their weapons. Something was very wrong. Ethan took a slow step back, his training kicking in. He was in a foreign palace, surrounded by unknown dangers, and the queen of one of the most powerful species in the galaxy was staring at him like she had seen a ghost. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said carefully. "I don't know what Catherine means, but my name is Ethan Vale. I'm a human, from Earth." Queen Frixa flinched, as if his words had struck her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice filled with something unreadable, she whispered, "No, that is impossible." Then, before Ethan could react, she collapsed to her knees. The room erupted into chaos. The room was in chaos. Thalaxi nobles murmured among themselves, their mandibles clicking rapidly in confusion. The guards gripped their weapons, unsure whether to act or wait for orders. Ambassador Claire Henshaw took a cautious step forward, her voice firm but controlled. "Is the Queen injured?" she asked. But Queen Vrixa did not respond. She remained on her knees, her 4 red eyes locked onto Ethan Vale. There was something in her gaze, something deep and haunted. Ethan could feel his heart pounding. He had faced battle before, had stared down enemies on distant worlds, but never had anyone looked at him like this. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was shock. It was grief. Slowly, Queen Vrixa's upper arms moved, pushing herself upright. She inhaled deeply, the strange clicking sound of her breathing filling the silent chamber. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. "How is this possible?" Ethan frowned. "How is what possible?" Vrixa took a step closer. The noble Felixi behind her flinched, as if unsure whether to stop her or not. "You look exactly like him," she whispered. "Exactly like Catharan." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You said that name before. Who is he?" Vrixa blinked, as if she had expected him to already know the answer. For the first time since she had seen him, her expression changed. Not just shock, but sadness. "Catharan was my consort," she said. "My mate. My king." A stunned silence fell over the room. Ethan took a step back. He had expected many things to happen during this mission. An interstellar war, a failed peace summit, maybe even an assassination attempt. But this was impossible. I don't understand," Ethan said slowly. "I'm human. I'm from Earth. I've never been here before. I've never met you before. How can I?" He shook his head. "How can I look like your husband?" Vrixa remained still for a moment, her hands twitching slightly. Then she turned toward one of her royal advisors. "Scan him," she ordered. Ethan tensed as a Felixi noble stepped forward, holding a small floating device covered in glowing blue patterns. The device hummed softly as it hovered near Ethan, sweeping a thin beam of light across his body. The moment the scan finished, the noble stiffened. His red eyes flashed in alarm. This cannot be," he whispered. Vrixa's voice was sharp. "What did it find?" The noble hesitated, as if afraid to speak, but finally he turned the device's display toward her. Ethan Vale's DNA was not purely human. There were traces of something else, something that matched Felixi genetic markers. Ethan stared at the screen. "That's impossible." "No," Vrixa murmured. "It is not." Ethan clenched his fists. He had gone through medical scans dozens of times. His DNA had always been human. No alien markers, no mutations, no anomalies. And yet here in the Felixi Palace, a scan said otherwise. Vrixa turned back to him. "Catharan vanished during the war with the Voidborn," she said. "His body was never recovered. We thought he had died. But now," her voice wavered, "now I must ask you, Ethan Vale, where did you really come from?" Ethan's mind raced. "I was born on Mars," he said. "My parents were human. My records are clear." He shook his head. "This is a mistake. I am not your husband." Vrixa's hands curled into fists. "Then explain this." She pointed at the scan, where a strand of data flashed brightly. A perfect match. Ethan's blood ran cold. He had seen enough battlefield reports to know that genetic similarity did not happen by accident. DNA was unique. Even cloned humans had tiny differences. But this was not normal. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance of the hall. A group of Felixi nobles pushed forward, their voices raised in alarm. "This is a trick," one of them hissed. "He is an impostor," another accused. "The queen is being deceived." The guards tensed, their weapons shifting slightly toward Ethan. The room was turning against him. Ambassador Henshaw quickly stepped forward. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice calm but firm. We had no knowledge of any resemblance before coming here. But the nobles were not convinced. Ethan was no longer just a human guard. He was something else. Vrixa raised a hand, silencing the nobles. Her gaze remained on Ethan, unreadable. "I need more than just a scan," she said. "I need proof." Ethan met her gaze. "What kind of proof?" She exhaled slowly. "If you are truly not Catherine, then you will have no memory of him." Ethan frowned. "Obviously." Vrixa stepped closer. "Then let me into your mind." Ethan stiffened. "Excuse me." "A memory probe," Vrixa said. "A thalexi technique. I will see into your past. If you have nothing to hide, then you will have nothing to fear." Ethan's gut told him this was a bad idea. But before he could respond, a loud explosion rocked the palace. The hall shook violently. The nobles cried out in alarm. Guards rushed to the doors, their weapons raised. The strange floating lights flickered. Ethan's hand instinctively went to his weapon. What the hell was that? Vrixa's eyes narrowed. Assassins. She turned toward the nearest guard. "Protect the humans." Then she turned back to Ethan. "If you are truly Catherine," she said, her voice low, "then we are both in danger." The explosion shook the palace again, sending cracks through the dark stone walls. Dust and shards of glowing crystal rained down from the high ceiling. The Thalexi nobles scrambled back in panic, their insect-like limbs clicking against the polished floor. Guards shouted orders in their strange, chittering language as the sound of energy weapons echoed from outside. Ethan Vale moved by instinct. His hand shot to his sidearm, but he hesitated. Ambassador Henshaw's warning still fresh in his mind. Reaching for a weapon in an alien palace was a quick way to hit shot. Instead, he scanned the room, looking for exits, threats, anything useful. Queen Vrixa was already barking orders to her warriors, her 4 red eyes glowing with anger. Not fear, anger. Ethan had seen battle-hardened commanders before, and she had the look of one. "Assassins," she growled, her mandibles twitching. They knew exactly when to strike. Another explosion roared from outside the chamber, and the heavy doors shuddered under an unseen force. The guards near the entrance moved into defensive positions, their spears crackling with raw energy. "We need to move," Ambassador Henshaw said sharply. Ethan nodded. He turned to Queen Vrixa. "Where's the safest place in the palace?" Vrixa's gaze flicked to him. For a moment, she hesitated, as if she were still seeing the ghost in front of her. But she snapped out of it quickly. "The inner vaults. Follow me." With surprising speed, she spun and led the way, her silver cloak flowing behind her. The Thalexi guards formed a protective ring around her, Ethan, and Henshaw as they rushed toward a side corridor. The walls of the palace pulsed with blue veins of energy as they moved, as if the very structure was alive. The distant sounds of battle grew louder. "This isn't just an attack on the queen," Henshaw muttered. "This is an attempted coup." Ethan glanced at her. "You sure?" She nodded grimly. "Look how coordinated they are. They had explosives planted inside the palace. This was planned for weeks, maybe months." Ethan frowned. If that was true, why attack now? Then he realized. Because of him. The moment Queen Vrixa had recognized him, had called him Catherine, the room had erupted in tension. Some of the nobles had seemed shocked. Others had seemed angry. What if someone didn't want the queen to know the truth? He clenched his jaw. "Do you have weapons stored in here?" Vrixa nodded toward a darkened section of the room. "Armory wall. Take what you need." Ethan sprinted to the armory panel and tapped on the holographic interface. A compartment slid open, revealing an array of sleek alien weapons. Most were unfamiliar to him, but he recognized a compact plasma rifle with a design similar to human models. He grabbed it, along with a few extra power cells, and returned to the defensive line. Ambassador Henshaw hesitated. "Are we really doing this?" Ethan smirked slightly. "You got a better idea." Henshaw exhaled sharply. "Just Don't get yourself killed. Ethan turned toward the door just as the final explosion ripped through the locking mechanism. The massive steel doors lurched open, and a wave of armored figures stormed inside. The assassins were not like the royal guards. Their exoskeletons were darker, their armor lighter, built for speed. Their weapons were curved and brutal-looking, humming with unstable energy. For a split second, no one moved. Then the air exploded with fire and fury. The fight begins. Ethan dived sideways as a streak of burning plasma sizzled through the air where he had been standing. He hit the ground in a controlled roll, coming up with his rifle aimed. 3 quick shots. The first hit an assassin in the chest. Their armor absorbed the blast, but the force staggered them. The second shot hit their leg, sending them crashing to the floor. The third struck true. The assassin fell, motionless. The room erupted into chaos. Vrix's guards clashed with the attackers, energy spears crackling as they met the assassin's blades. Metal screeched against metal. Sparks flew as armor shattered. The air was thick with the sound of battle. Vrixa herself moved like a storm, her royal staff pulsing with energy as she fought. She blocked an incoming strike with ease, then countered with a powerful swing, sending her enemy crashing into a nearby wall. Ethan caught movement to his left, another assassin lunging toward him. He spun, bringing up his rifle, too slow. But before the assassin could strike, Vrixa was there. Her staff cracked against the assassin's weapon, knocking it aside. With a single fluid motion, she drove the weapon's blunt end into the enemy's chest, sending them sprawling. Ethan exhaled. Not bad. Vrixa shot him a look. Stay alive, and I'll take that as a compliment. A dangerous truth. As the battle raged, Ethan noticed something. The assassins weren't just here to kill. They were focused on him. 2 of them broke from the main fight, advancing toward him with purpose. Their weapons hummed menacingly. Ethan gritted his teeth. Great, guess I'm popular now. He fired at the nearest one, but they dodged with unnatural speed. Too fast. The second assassin lunged. Ethan barely managed to twist away. Their blade grazed his side, burning through his armor. He hissed in pain but didn't slow down. He slammed the butt of his rifle into the assassin's face, forcing them back. But they kept coming. Relentless. Precise. Something about their movements felt familiar. Ethan narrowed his eyes. He had fought like this before. No, that was impossible. Wasn't it? Before he could process the thought, one of the assassins spoke. Catherine. Ethan froze. His grip on his rifle tightened. What did you just say? The assassin tilted their head. You were meant to stay dead. Ethan's chest felt tight. His vision flickered. Another memory, half-formed, just out of reach. A voice. A battle. A name that wasn't his, but somehow it was. For a split second, he hesitated. The assassin saw the opening and struck. Ethan barely had time to react. A sharp blade slashed toward him. At the last moment, Vrixa intervened. She threw herself between them, blocking the attack with her staff. The assassin's blade bit into her armor, cutting deep. Vrixa gasped in pain. Ethan felt something snap inside him. Rage. Before the assassin could react, Ethan moved. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. He tore the blade from the assassin's grasp, spun it in his hands like he had done it 1,000 times before, and drove it straight through their chest. The assassin staggered. Their red eyes widened in shock. Ethan's breathing was heavy. His mind burned. His hands had moved on their own. The assassin collapsed. The battle was over. The aftermath. The vault was littered with fallen bodies. The remaining assassins had been defeated. Vrix's guards stood victorious, though wounded. Ethan's hands were still shaking. He stared down at the blade in his grip, his breath unsteady. He shouldn't have known how to do that. Vrixa, still clutching her wound, looked at him with something between pain and understanding. You remembered, she whispered. Ethan opened his mouth. No, I don't. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, a terrible truth was beginning to take shape. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't just Ethan Vale. The vault was silent except for the heavy breathing of the survivors. The metallic scent of energy burns and the sharp tang of blood filled the air. Dim blue lights flickered from the damaged walls, casting eerie shadows over the fallen assassins. Ethan Vale stood motionless, staring at the alien blade still clutched in his hands. It was slick with dark blood. His fingers tightened around the hilt as a cold shiver ran through him. He shouldn't have known how to fight like that. The movements, the precision, the way the weapon had felt natural in his grasp. It wasn't training. It was memory. Queen Vrixa, holding her wounded side, took a slow step toward him. Her red eyes, still fierce despite the pain, studied him closely. "You remember," she whispered. It was not a question. Ethan exhaled sharply and forced himself to look away. "No," he muttered. "I don't." Vrixa tilted her head. "Your body does." He shook his head, rubbing his temple. His thoughts were tangled. He was Ethan Vale, a human soldier. He was born on Mars. He had fought in border skirmishes against raiders. His parents. His breath caught. Their faces. Why couldn't he remember their faces? A hand touched his shoulder, snapping him back to the moment. It was Ambassador Henshaw. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "Ethan, we need to move," she said firmly. More of them might be coming. She was right. This wasn't the time to fall apart. Ethan pushed down the storm inside his mind and focused. He turned to Vrixa. "Can you walk?" The queen straightened, wincing slightly. "I am not so weak as to fall from a mere wound." Ethan smirked faintly. "Good, because we're getting out of here." Escape from the vault. Vrixa's guards helped her as the group moved through a hidden passage at the back of the vault. The walls pulsed with faint, ancient energy, the symbols shifting as they passed. "This tunnel leads to the outer sections of the palace," Vrixa explained. "If the coup is still ongoing, we must be careful." Ethan nodded. "Agreed. We stick together." As they moved deeper into the tunnels, Ethan's thoughts kept circling back to the fight, to the name. Catherine. He had seen the hologram of the Thalaxi warrior. He had seen his own face reflected in the past. Was he really a reborn version of this alien warlord? No, that's impossible. And yet, a sudden sound snapped him to attention. Footsteps. Ethan raised his rifle, signaling the others to halt. The air felt heavy with tension. Then, from the shadows, a new figure emerged. The enemy revealed. It was a Thalaxi, but not like the others. His exoskeleton was dark, almost black, and his 4 red eyes burned with intelligence. He wore a high-ranking battle cloak, the edges marked with symbols of war. Vrixa's breath hitched. "High Lord Zareth." Ethan tightened his grip on his weapon. So this was the one behind the attack. Zareth smiled, his mandibles twitching. "My queen, how fortunate that you survived." His voice was smooth, almost mocking. He took a slow step forward, his armored hands clasped behind his back. "You should not have fought," he continued. "It would have been painless. Now it will be messy." Vrixa's eyes narrowed. "You betray the throne." Zareth tilted his head. "The throne betrayed us." His gaze flicked to Ethan. "And now, it brings back a ghost." Ethan stayed silent, watching. Zareth wasn't surprised to see him. "You knew," Ethan said finally. Zareth chuckled. "Of course. I knew the moment I saw you." The same fire, the same defiance. His voice lowered. The same mistake. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Then tell me, who the hell am I?" Zareth's smile faded. "You are an echo of something that should have died. A relic that was meant to be forgotten." Ethan's fingers twitched on the trigger. He was done with cryptic answers. Zareth spread his arms. "But I am not without mercy. Leave now, human, and I will spare you." Ethan exhaled slowly. Then he raised his rifle. Not happening. Zareth sighed. So be it. A deadly standoff. Without warning, Zareth moved. He was fast, impossibly fast. One moment he was standing still. The next, he was upon them. Ethan barely managed to react. He fired. A direct hit to Zareth's chest. But the blast did nothing. Zareth's armor absorbed the energy, and in a blur of motion, he knocked Ethan's rifle aside and sent him crashing into the tunnel wall. Pain exploded through Ethan's ribs. He gasped, struggling to get up. Zareth loomed over him, raising a crackling energy blade. "You are not Catherine," he said. "You are a shadow, and shadows fade." Ethan's vision blurred. He saw another moment, another time. A battlefield, a burning sky. A younger Zareth stood across from him, rage in his eyes. And then Ethan saw himself, not as a human, as Catherine. He had fought Zareth before. He had won. The memory snapped into focus. I know how he fights. Zareth's blade descended, but Ethan was already moving. He twisted aside at the last second, grabbed a fallen weapon from the ground, and slammed the hilt into Zareth's arm. Sparks flew as the energy blade flickered. Zareth snarled, caught off guard for just a moment. Ethan didn't hesitate. He spun the weapon in his hands, just like in his memories, and slashed. The blade sliced across Zareth's armor, cutting deep. The High Lord staggered back, eyes wide in shock. Ethan rose to his feet, breathing heavily. The weapon in its hands felt right. Zareth's gaze darkened. He took a slow step back, his mandibles twitching in frustration. "So, you do remember." Ethan stared at him, his grip tightening. "I'm starting to." Zareth exhaled, then turned toward the shadows. "Then this is far from over." With that, he vanished into the darkness. The truth cannot be ignored. Ethan stood still, his heart pounding. His body ached, but his mind was waking up. Queen Vrixis stepped beside him. "You fought like him." Ethan took a deep breath. "Because I was him." He didn't know how. But one thing was clear. Catherine was back. And the war was not over. The tunnels were silent after Zareth vanished into the darkness. The echoes of battle still lingered in the air, and the smell of scorched metal mixed with dust. Ethan Vale stood there, gripping the alien weapon in his hands. His body ached from the fight, but something deeper inside him burned. A memory. A past that wasn't supposed to exist. Queen Vrixis stepped beside him, her injured side still bleeding, but her expression unreadable. "He fears you," she said quietly. Ethan let out a breath. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Ambassador Henshaw, standing nearby, shook her head. "You're Ethan Vale. That's who you are." Ethan turned to her. "Am I?" His voice was strained. I knew how he would attack before he even moved. My hands fought like they had done this before. And that name, Catherine, it keeps coming back. Henshaw clenched her jaw. "Even if you were someone else before, it doesn't matter. You're human now." Vrix's gaze lingered on Ethan. A soul does not forget its past. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "I don't have time for riddles. We need to move before Zareth returns with reinforcements." Vrixa nodded. "There's a hidden chamber ahead. It belonged to." She hesitated, then continued, "Catherine, if you seek answers, that is where you will find them." Ethan exhaled. "Lead the way." The Chamber of Echoes. The tunnel walls changed as they moved deeper underground. The smooth metallic structures turned into something older, something carved from stone. Strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls, symbols that Ethan somehow understood. It wasn't human language, yet he could read it. The words whispered of war, of fallen heroes, of a warrior who led the Thalaxi against invaders. His name was etched into the walls again and again. Catherine. Ethan's breath hitched as the memory scratched at his mind. like whispers just beyond his reach. Finally, they entered a large chamber. The walls were lined with old weapons, armor, and faded banners. At the center stood a large holographic pedestal. Vrixa activated it. A *** figure appeared, *** tall, armored, and powerful. His 4 red eyes burned with determination. His face was unmistakable. It was Ethan. No, it was Catherine. Ethan took a step closer, his chest tightening. The hologram flickered, and a deep voice filled the chamber. "If you are seeing this, then I have failed." Ethan clenched his fists. The voice continued. "The war was not meant to end like this. The Thalaxy should have stood together, but betrayal runs deep. If I fall, I can only hope that my essence finds a way back." The hologram turned, as if looking right at Ethan. "And if you are watching this, then perhaps I have returned." Ethan's breathing was unsteady. "No, this isn't possible." Henshaw shook her head in disbelief. "This has to be some kind of trick." But Vrixa was calm. "It is the truth." Ethan's mind spun. He had lived his whole life as a human. He had childhood memories, military training, experiences on Mars. But now, those memories felt thinner, weaker, like a dream compared to the reality standing before him. The hologram spoke again. "The war is not over. Zareth will not stop. The throne will fall unless the warrior rises again." Ethan took a shaky breath. His reflection stared back at him in the flickering light of the projection. Was he really Catherine? Or was he just a soldier who had been dragged into something bigger than himself? A choice must be made. The silence was broken by a distant rumbling. Vrixa turned sharply. "He's coming." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Then we finish this." Henshaw grabbed his arm. "Ethan, wait. We don't even know if this is true. What if they're just using you?" Ethan met her gaze. "Then why do I remember?" Henshaw had no answer. Ethan turned to Vrixa. "If I was Catherine, why did I die?" Vrixa hesitated before answering. "You were betrayed. Zareth and his followers feared what you stood for. They struck before you could stop them." Ethan exhaled sharply. "And now he's trying again." Vrixa nodded. "Yes, but this time, you have another chance." Ethan looked down at his hands. They were human hands, flesh and bone. But somewhere inside, the fire of Catherine still burned. The past didn't matter. The present did. He turned to the weapons lining the walls. His gaze fell on an old blade, its edges cracked with age, but still humming with energy. Something inside him recognized it. Ethan reached out and wrapped his fingers around the hilt. The blade glowed. Henshaw stared in shock. "Ethan." He looked back at her. "I don't know who I was," he admitted, "but I know what I have to do." He turned toward the entrance. Zareth was coming. And this time, there would be no betrayal. This time, Ethan Vale, or Catherine, would be ready. The chamber trembled as the distant sound of marching feet grew louder. The air was thick with tension. Queen Vrixa and Ambassador Henshaw stood behind Ethan, their eyes filled with anticipation. Ethan tightened his grip on the ancient blade. The energy pulsing through it felt like an old friend. The memories were still scattered, but one thing was clear. He had fought this battle before. And this time, he would not lose. Vrixa turned to him. "Zareth will bring his best warriors. He will not allow you to leave here alive." Ethan nodded. "Then we finish this now." The heavy doors of the chamber slammed open. Zareth stepped inside, his dark exoskeleton gleaming under the dim blue lights. His red eyes locked onto Ethan. Behind him, a squad of heavily armed Thalaxy warriors entered, their weapons ready. "Catherine," Zareth said, his voice laced with mockery. "Or should I call you by your new name, Ethanvale?" Ethan raised his blade. "Call me whatever you want. I'm still going to stop you." Zareth chuckled. "You are a shadow of what you once were, a lost warrior clinging to broken memories. He unsheathed his energy blade, its dark edge crackling with raw power. And shadows do not win wars. Ethan smirked. Then you better start running. The battle begins. Zareth lunged forward, his blade cutting through the air. Ethan dodged, his instincts taking over. He parried the next strike with ease, the force of the impact sending sparks flying. The Felixi warriors charge, their weapons raised. Vrix's guards rushed forward to meet them. The chamber erupted into chaos as energy blasts and steel clashed. Henshaw ducked behind a pillar, firing at the enemy with her pistol. "Ethan, don't die on me now," she shouted. Ethan didn't respond. He was too focused. Zareth struck again, his movements fast and precise. But Ethan was faster. He blocked, twisted, and countered with a strike of his own. It was all coming back. Zareth's eyes widened slightly. Impossible. Ethan pressed forward, his blade moving like a storm. Sparks flew as their weapons collided again and again. And then, he saw it. A gap in Zareth's stance. A weakness. Ethan didn't hesitate. He moved, slipping past Zareth's guard and slashing across his chest. Zareth roared in pain, stumbling back. The warriors around them hesitated, shocked. Their leader, wounded. Ethan pointed his blade at Zareth. "Looks like shadows can fight after all." The turning point. Zareth's mandibles clenched. He touched the wound on his chest, his fingers coated in dark blood. "You think this changes anything?" he growled. He raised his hand, and the remaining warriors regrouped around him. Kill them all. The battle raged on. Ethan fought like a man possessed. Every movement felt like destiny. He struck down enemy after enemy, his blade a blur of energy and steel. Vrixa fought beside him, her own weapon slashing through Zareth's soldiers. Even Henshaw, though a diplomat, fought with sharp precision, taking down enemies with well-placed shots. One by one, the enemy forces fell, until only Zareth remained. He was breathing heavily, his body covered in wounds. His red eyes burned with rage. "This isn't over," he spat. Ethan tilted his head. "Yeah, it is." Zareth roared and charged one last time. But Ethan was ready. He sidestepped the attack, spun his blade, and drove it straight into Zareth's chest. Zareth gasped, his body going rigid. His red eyes dimmed as he staggered backward. For a moment, silence filled the chamber. Then Zareth collapsed. It was over. A new future. Ethan stood over the fallen warlord, his breathing heavy. Queen Vrixa stepped forward, looking down at Zareth's lifeless body. Then she turned to Ethan. "You have done what Catherine could not. You ended the war." Ethan exhaled. The weight of everything pressed down on him. The memories, the battle, the truth of who he was, or who he had been. Henshaw stepped beside him. "So, what now?" Ethan looked around. The battle was over, but the scars of war remained. He had spent his whole life believing he was just a soldier. Now he knew he was something more. But his past didn't define him. His choices did. He turned to Vrixa. "Your people need a leader. A real one." Vrixa nodded. "And you? What do you need?" Ethan stared at the blade in his hands. It had been Catharon's weapon. But now, it was his. "I need to figure out where I belong," he admitted. Vrixa smiled slightly. "Wherever you go, know this. Catharon's spirit lives within you. But you are Ethan Vale. And that is enough." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, I think it is." He looked at Henshaw. "Let's go home." As they walked away, the weight of the past remained behind them. The war was over. The future was unwritten. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Vale was free.